Well, tearing down encampments and putting protesters under arrest. New clashes today between police and demonstrators on college campuses. Here in D.C., police pepper spraying protesters, breaking up an encampment there at George Washington University. At least 33 people arrested. Then in New York City, police were breaking up an encampment at the Fashion Institute of Technology. Roughly 50 people there were arrested. Our Phil Lipoff has been following all the latest developments. Phil, let's go ahead and start with the situation at GW. Protesters had been camped out there for 2 weeks. What made police finally move in?
Well, warning after warning after warning, and right off the bat, Kara, we should mention that the protesters at GW and other places still at this hour know what's going to happen eventually. The police are going to move in, and in D.C. they did to clear out that encampment. It had been there, as I mentioned, for more than a week. There was a skirmish, as you see. You mentioned 33 people were arrested. I will say what's interesting about this particular incident is that it happened just hours before Washington Mayor Muriel Bowser and her police chief were scheduled to testify in front of a congressional committee investigating the response to that encampment over the past week or so. I mean, this happened in the early morning hours, and that committee was scheduled to have a hearing today. When Oversight Chair James Comer, a Republican from Kentucky, heard about the police action and clearing of the encampment, he announced that the hearing was canceled. We don't need to have it anymore, and he took credit for the action.
It's interesting, Phil, just coming across the wire here, that during a press conference with D.C. police, they were explaining that they shut down George Washington University's encampment at 3 a.m., saying that protesters from Columbia University actually showed up and infiltrated these protests. It's interesting to kind of see, as things slow down there in New York, there are still those that were involved with these protests kind of moving into other areas.
And it's not really surprising, because when we talked to some of these protesters at Columbia specifically, they said, we're not going to stop until there is a ceasefire. So, they didn't tell us they were going to show up in other places, but it doesn't surprise me for sure.
Well, you've gone across country following all the other encampments and protests. What do we know?
Well, in terms of outside agitators, we should touch on that. Everywhere we've gone and covered this across the country, there's been this talk about outside agitators. We've seen more than 2,500 arrests across the country. It could even be more now at more than 40 campuses. The percentage of people arrested is different from campus to campus. At Columbia, the NYPD says about 30% of those they arrested were not affiliated with that school. But at City College of New York, that number was way higher. 60% of the people arrested, police tell us, were not affiliated with that school. So who are these people? Where are they coming from? They're not always freely giving their organization, but what we do know is that there is a portion of these protests, these pro-Palestinian protests, that outside people are coming in to, I don't know, police will say agitate or just be there and do whatever they do.
Phil, it's such a bummer. Some of these universities canceling commencement speeches now. I mean, for those that may not have even been involved, they don't. Yeah, a lot of these students are excited to get up on that stage, receive that diploma, and it's what they've worked so hard for.
Not just excited, but yeah, they've earned it, right? They've done these 4 years. One of my children, my oldest, is class of 2020. So we had to drive by her high school in 2020 during the pandemic for her graduation. Luckily, she's at a school that her graduation is not threatened, but she has friends who are at schools. I have a nephew who's at USC, and these kids. The bummer is a great technical term that you came up with, Kira. It is a bummer for these kids, and they've gotten used to bummer after bummer over the last 4 years with the pandemic and now this. It's sad.
I'm going back to my days in college where that was the word, bummer.
It's a good word. It's a good word.
Yes, it is.
It is a bummer.
Yes, and it never gets old.
All encompassing.
Phil, appreciate you, Phil.